In short, the crisis of primitive accumulation, neoliberalism, and the crisis of liberal democracy are actually inseparable. We will not be able to separate them in thinking about elections. Now, this therefore raises the question about how to make sense out of the recent electoral outcomes, and what, if anything, they would change, and what do they tell us about electoral politics, democracy, and the working people. In the short time I have, I want to explore these questions using the Ghana case, and with the understanding that there are country specificities, but also common questions for all countries that we can discuss further. So Ghana's status as model colony, the first country south of the Sahara to hold elections for independence, the star pupil of structural adjustment, and the successful alternation of power between its two major political parties, hides its neo-colonial status and the choiceless democracy it offers its citizens. From 1966, when the first coup d'etat overthrew Kwame Nkrumah's regime, until 1992, Ghana was largely under military rule. With the consolidation of economic liberalization and structural adjustment, the economy resumed its position as a reliable supplier of primary agricultural commodities and minerals, especially gold, and an attractive destination for mining companies. The process was completed with Ghana's return to constitutional rule in 1992. And the outcome of this reconstitution of Ghana's economy has been the story of many countries in the global south. The expansion of primitive accumulation, economic growth powered by enclave sectors, with many more working people facing existential crisis. And this kind of economy experiences secular crisis, and these are linked with fluctuating commodity prices, food prices, and debt. And Ghana is no exception to this. In the recent elections in Ghana in December 2024, the elections were seen as very significant because of the depth of this particular cycle of the crisis Ghana was facing. COVID-19 and its aftermath contracted the economy and damaged the livelihoods of many of its working people who are self-employed people. And this was compounded with a capital flight as a result of high interest rates in the West. And it resulted in a massive devaluation of the currency, hyperinflation, and a debt crisis. At the height of the crisis in 2022, the cedi declined more than 55%, among the steepest declines of any currency in the world that year. Headline inflation was 54.1% in December 2022. It lowered to 42.2% in May 2023, and now projected at 23.2% by the World Bank. For an economy heavily reliant on imports, the devaluation wreaked violence on businesses, and traders were forced to pay exorbitant amounts in foreign currency, costs that they then passed on to consumers, leading to skyrocketing prices of essential goods and services. The government went to the IMF for support to resolve the debt crisis and was persuaded to institute domestic debt restructuring, an unprecedented event that destroyed the banking, pension funds, and insurance sectors. And these sectors were destroyed because they had purchased government bonds as a requirement, and it wiped out the savings of many individuals, some of whom were working people and also pensioners. And to add insult to injury, massive corruption by the ruling elite was a staple of media reports throughout this period. A media campaign against illegal small-scale mining began also to focus on the fact that its persistence and expansion was linked with elite accumulation strategies. By early 2024, it had become clear that if the elections were free and fair, the ruling party was headed for a fall. The main issues being mentioned were living conditions, the cost of housing, water, and electricity, the crisis in education and health, youth unemployment, food inflation, illegal mining, corruption, and domestic debt restructuring. Elections came, and the loss of the ruling party was massive and unprecedented. They now have 88 seats out of the 275-member parliament, and their presidential candidate it received around 41% of the votes. Violence broke out in the aftermath of the elections, with many incidents blamed on party supporters, particularly the so-called foot soldiers, vigilante groups with adherence to the two major political parties. There were riots, vandalism, arsons, beatings, attacks on security agencies, and fatalities. And some of these were linked to disputes in the declaration of resource in constituencies, while others were linked with vigilantes made up of mainly young men taking over state assets and attacking opponents. Interestingly, party supporters of the new ruling party were singing revolutionary songs outside the courts and declaring that the elections had been a revolution. Party supporters have vandalized party offices to protect the lack of representation in the executive branch of government. And whilst elections have reduced the pressure in the cooker, in the run up to the elections, a lot of commentators believe that it will only build up soon if the ruling party disappoints, and signs are that it will. It reassured the IMF that it will comply with agreements with the last government, in spite of a flurry of announcements such as banning mining in the forests and so on. So what can we learn about the working people and democracy from the Ghana space? I think the first point is the need to deepen our theorizing of the working people. Shivji's call to deepen our theorizing of the working people has become even more urgent in this context. As Shivji pointed out, over 5 decades of globalization and neoliberalism has deepened the dominance of primitive accumulation and created conditions in which the majority of producers have in common the experience of having to minimize their necessary consumption while maximizing their labor. And he defines primitive accumulation under neoliberalism as the process of surplus extraction by capital based on the expropriation of parts of the necessary consumption of the producer. And this, he argues, is the material base common to all sectors of the working people. And these include, in his view, the peasants, pastoralists, proletarians, semi-proletarians, street hawkers, peddlers, operators and repairs in backyard stores. Any of us could add more and more groups to this category in thinking about a post-colony like Ghana. What's important about this group is that they were the hardest hit by the COVID pandemic and its aftermath, when poverty and immiseration increased exponentially and inequalities between working people and the different segments of the bourgeoisie deepened. These groups are also in the majority of voters in any country, and even more so in African countries where the majority of workers are engaged in precarious work, mostly as self-employed or casual work, or in the case of many young persons, are unemployed. What we term as voter behavior can be read as the responses of working people to their predicaments within the limits imposed by bourgeois democracy. Their common experience of capital and state exploitation notwithstanding, our theorizing has to grapple with several complexities. Working people encompass groups and people with intersecting identities of class, gender, generation, ethnicity, and religion. This fragments how they identify their interests in any situation, and also this shows in situations of elections. In context of generalized crises, such as the COVID pandemic, and the current debt crisis, alliances of working people have acted in concert with more or less coordination, spontaneity, and organization. The Trade Union of Ghana threatened a national strike if pension funds were included in the local debt restructuring, and the government backed down. But it still went after individual bondholders with haircuts, and many of these were pensioners. Certain methods and issues of struggle in the last few years in Ghana have fragmented working people and alienated some of the most vulnerable minorities. For example, the anti-LGBTQ law in Ghana, which mobilized many working people against vulnerable minorities, or the anti-illegal mining campaign, which saw urban working people arrayed against rural working people. This should not be dismissed as false consciousness, but rather should spur us on to theorize better what we mean by this category, the working people. The second lesson I want to take from the Ghana case, and indeed from several African cases, is liberal democracy as a limit to the struggle for alternatives. The political terrain demobilizes certain kinds of organizing, politics, and demands. You only had to listen to the campaign that was waged by the two political parties, major political parties in Ghana, to see the trivialization of existential questions. The songs that were composed were basically the staple of the campaign, who was dancing better and who was making more and more promises, with everybody clear that these promises will not be fulfilled. And part of the problem is the hegemonic idea of one person, one vote, which hides a multitude of sins and the power of capital in controlling the outcomes of electoral context. And not surprisingly, Nkandawire has argued that globalization has two contradictory effects on democratization. On one hand is the opening up of economies and societies and the political conditionalities transmitted through global institutions and the solidarity of global civil society, which is generally supportive of democratization efforts. That's one side. On the other side, the demands of globalization, especially the erosion of national sovereignty and the uniformalization of what are considered fundamentals in economic policy, which therefore limits the range of policy options and democratic regimes. And so the ruling elite, whoever they are, whatever their predilections, inherits economies over which key decisions have been taken already by unelected foreign technocrats, and therefore resulting in what has been called choiceless democracies. This, therefore, in my view, gives elections an exaggerated salience in bringing about substantive change. The third lesson I want to draw out of the Ghana case is that elections can deepen the fragmentation of working people in a liberal democracy. What we see is, therefore, that voters go for options that seem irrational to some of us. Voters can stay at home. For example, the Afrobarometer is finding that African youth are not voting so as to punish the elite for their neglect. We also see heightened ethnic and religious tensions because of voting patterns and election campaign discourses. And this also strengthens the influence of chiefs and religious leaders in the Ghanaian political landscape. Post-election violence can create further destabilization and fragment the working people who now are divided among supporters of bourgeois parties. And violence in electoral politics often alienates groups such as women and reinforces the idea that politics is male business. If you take the case of Ghana, in the aftermath of the elections, the elite, the bourgeoisie, were positioning themselves for government appointments and contracts, while the working people were supporting them on grounds of ethnicity, religion, and region. In the meantime, the fundamental problems of the neocolony remain unattended. My fourth lesson is that all of these points point to the importance of reviving organizations of working people for non-electoral politics. Such work can deepen the influence of working people on electoral politics and the struggle for alternatives for the future. So I'll leave it here and then we can take it up during discussion. Thank you.
Always, we will come back to those issues at a later stage after everyone has presented, but there are quite a number of issues to be able to discuss as we open the floor. We move on straight away to Lucas.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. May I present my screen here?
No. No. They tell him that he must share the PPT with presentation with the.
Oh, Lucas.
Yes.
Are you able to share your PowerPoint to send to Steve via email? Then you can
send to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Via the Zoom itself or the WhatsApp or what channel?
I think the WhatsApp group. WhatsApp.
Okay. I'll send it to you, Frido.
Okay, send. Or then we can maybe in the meantime we can move to Twinkle. Then we'll come back to you, Lucas, at a later stage. Once
Okay, sure.
everything has been. Yeah.
I have sent to you.
Twinkle? Okay, thank you. Twinkle?
Can I come in?
Yes.
All right.
you can come.
Good evening from India, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, Twinkle.
All right. Good
Sure.
evening from India. I am Dr. Twinkle Sivaj, and I was thinking that I would be the last speaker, and I would be speaking after Sandeep. So I thought that I would be highlighting the points of the media as far as talking about the democracy in India. I want to highlight 2-3 key points. Number one of which is how audience in the current regime from active citizens are turning into only mere consumers. So a couple of points on that first. I want to talk about how in the current regime, the reading of the newsline itself is becoming a very class-based scenario. So in the current context, we are seeing how media have been changing their relation to the political processes. We have a lot of evidence in terms of showing how media's disinterest is becoming more and more visible for the actual working class realities. All of us recognize Max Weber, who suggested long back how wider political and economical societal context influence media organizations. And state, of course, becomes a key feature in this process. In the current political, social scenario, economical scenario, what we see is how shareholders and private funders are continuously influencing the direction of a media organization and preventing it from covering the issues or areas of working class interest. Naturally, then, in the order of the things, these owners have allocated over resources as well as the operational control over the management and day-to-day operations of these media organizations. My argument is that this approach to media institutions highlights the profit motive as a significant factor that underpins the actions of most media owners. Then what is the result? The consequence is that now we have a growing trend towards the monopoly of news, in which we see two sorts of integration. The first is horizontal, in which we see the buying of smaller independent companies, which might be doing an initiative of maybe a little bit representing what we are talking about. And the second, which is vertical, is the purchase of related businesses in production, right? So if we understand this, the argument that I made in the beginning is how this entire process makes the media culture posit the media audiences as mere consumers rather than citizens. Just to add one more thought on the same argument, how we try to understand, so scholars like Sonia Livingstone and Habermas, etc., have talked about the public sphere. But I want to bring in the concept of citizenship as far as we're talking about the democracy. So, largely we have to understand, and this was Sonia Livingstone's argument, that if the citizenry is to play a role in democracy, then it needs to access to an institutionally guaranteed forum in which to express their opinions and to question established power, the citizens have to play a greater role. In the current Indian context, if we analyze almost the past 1 decade, which has largely been ruled by one particular ruling party, we observe that the media's autonomy is very much diluted, with spaces of freedom of speech crunching, with more linear sort of narration of events. Any event is being created. On media and democracy, there's also another scholar who has been writing a lot, and the scholar is Arvind Rajagopal from India, but based in New York right now, who is also discussing about the practices of the media and the government's role in clipping media freedom in India. And we also have the evidence in terms of the Press Freedom Index and so on, where over the years, the rank of Indian press media in terms of the Freedom Index has only been slipping year by year. So therefore, with the media ownership from state control to market driven, we are understanding how content has become merely an audience aggregator, even if the content is false or antisocial. And if we go event by event or case by case, we can really discuss that.
Just lost you. Jingle, we just lost you.
We have lost her from here.
Mike. Yeah, can't hear you. I don't know. Can you hear us? Can you hear me?
Check. We can't hear her.
I can hear you and not Twinkle too.
Yeah, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. It's message. Try to. Yeah, you're unmuted now. Try.
Am I audible?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, you can go on.
Am I audible?
Yes, go on.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll just repeat my last point before I go ahead. I was talking about a couple of cases, and I was largely arguing that from the media ownership, from the state control to market driven, the content has become merely an audience aggregator, even if the content is false or antisocial. From there, I'll move to my next point, wherein I'm arguing that in the present regime, what we are witnessing is also an ever-increasing fragmentation. For that, I would like to quote Habermas, who sees the media as creating a society of private and fragmented individuals for whom it is difficult to form the public, rational, critical opinion which could oppose established power. Now we must question, can the media potentially provide sites for public participation, expert accountability, integration of expert, or even pay knowledge or provisions of ideal communicative situations? And if we use that theory in terms of analyzing the current context, the current media paradigm is complex, contradictory, and fragmented, where the media mediation is not neutral and is affecting the political processes. Therefore, what we are witnessing is growing public apathy and unpredicted election results. For example, recently what we have witnessed is a Mahakumbh stampede, right? Which is a religious congregation of a peculiar kind, which happens once in 145 years. And analyzing that particular event, we can see how the collective effervescence led to chaos and danger, even loss of life. Now, media has failed in reporting about the infrastructure of the event in the larger scale. And we are talking about these stampedes at religious gatherings, not merely as accidents, but also as reflections of complex interaction between faith, social organization, and human behavior. My third point is on the recent elections which are due in India, which is the national capital, Delhi state elections. Now, in January, we celebrated our Republic Day. And there were interesting photos that are coming from the different corners of the nation, which is the saffron flags, which are representing a particular ruling party, are much above placed in terms of their sale in comparison to the national flags. Now, if I talk about Delhi, the two parties which are emerging as contesting to each other, one is, of course, the national ruling party, and the other, a much recent party in comparison, which is commonly known to be representing the interest of the middle class, which basically emerged in the light of the anti-corruption movement against the then-led Congress government in the national capital. Now, as the tragic time unfolds for the national capital itself, the chief minister, a popular face from the then movement, also stands under the charges of corruption. In that sense, I agree with Professor Dodzi that electoral democracy in India as well is going through challenging times. Moreover, we are constantly putting, yeah.
Can you wind up in 2 minutes?
Okay, just a last argument then. You know, we are
7 minutes. Sorry, 7 minutes. Sorry for that. 7 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. 7 minutes.
So I was talking about that how we are constantly putting in a lot of money into the defense sector on international borders, while the internal conflicts also remain unresolved. And we have a couple of examples. Quickly, just going about to like few of them. In the past 1 decade, what we are observing is the reign of mobocracy rather than democracy. We are witnessing rising instances of intolerance and fragmentation in the national fabric, which is reflecting the failure of the nation state to ensure that diverse cultural and religious populations are not really ensured dignity and justice. We are also witnessing rise in hate speech against other religious, caste communities, and even working class, because the kind of movements that have been happening over the past decade are not really talked about, not at least in the mainstream media, and there to some extent alternative media forms, which again from the Marxist analysis remain very individualistic and particularistic, are somehow talking about it. We are also witnessing increasing polarization on communal lines. Overall, there's a larger social order which is crumbling, and the disorder is basically ushering. There's also a rise of new information society in which a culture of forward messages is becoming the thing, which is lacking the source, or the authenticity of the message remains questionable, leaving it to ideology becoming the central force to shape consciousness of an individual. Therefore, the dominant ideology in the current context imposes the unequal and exploitative ways of oppression against the other. Okay? And yeah, I mean, I think I would like to talk about these things, and perhaps I would like to take on further in the discussion section.
Thank you, Tringo. I think we continue to see certainly certain developments, Asia and Africa. I think there's some commonalities which we're seeing, which we will discuss in the discussion section. Are we ready for Lucas, or we can move to Dogo? Are we ready with PowerPoint? Lucas, Dogo will come back to you soon after this.
Okay.
I didn't understand. Is it me or Ndongo?
If you come in, Lucas, they're going to share your, they're going to purchase your PowerPoint now.
Okay. Let me know when I can start.
So you also have 15 minutes once when you're done. Yeah, so 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, good morning. I'm very happy to be here again. I'm sorry I'm not present in Harare, hopefully next year. But anyhow, it's always a pleasure to be with my comrades. So I try to make a exploratory analysis of the current situation globally, starting with the characterization of the periods of late neocolonialism that we have been working on in the network. So you can please move ahead. As Paris was talking in his presentation yesterday, capitalism has, in its 500 years of history, always accompanied by colonialism. Colonialism was has been the main modes of rule of capitalism. Colonies were the privileged locus of primitive accumulation of capital. And drinking on Rosa Luxemburg, that primitive accumulation has been accompanying also the expanded reproduction of capital. So in that sense, colonies have been essential to the accumulation of capital. By the time the imperialist stage, as we all know, emerged under monopoly capital, that sets the condition of the emergence of welfare states. There's an error there. So facing the emergence, not the emergency, the emergence of the periphery, monopoly capital has retreated to neocolonialism, which is a mode of rule that gives up direct juridical and political control of the colonies and exchanges it for the continuing economic exploitation and also varying degrees of outside political control over independent states. You can go on, move ahead, please.
Next slide, yeah.
Yeros and Ja have distinguished early neocolonialism from late neocolonialism. So during early neocolonialism, which was the kind of a transition phase from colonialism to neocolonialism, it was a contradictory period because in the one hand, imperialism supported settlers and reactionary forces and tried to prevent the empowerment of more radical versions of national projects. But nevertheless, a considerable number of states have retained a radical path, a radical trajectory, and with nationalist, developmentalist, and anti-colonial characteristics. On the other hand, a number of juridically independent states, settler states, prevented the decolonization during this time and remained in settler colonial mode of political domination. But they also developed the productive forces and, to a degree, contested imperialism. So these were the most contradictory states. On the whole, these periods had the possibility for some states to retain this nationalist path. So in that sense, there was a window for developments and for national projects that has closed in the next period, which is late neocolonialism. So you can move on to the next slide, please. So late neocolonialism is a period when this window for development closes, monopoly capital escalates the neocolonial drain of surplus during this period, although with declining compensations for the working classes at the center. And this period is characterized by the maintenance of the national sovereignty regime that took place during the early neocolonialism period, but also the demise of the Bandung and the Soviet system in a permanent crisis of monopoly capital. And also, imperialism escalates military interventions, and also, as we're going to see, electoral interventions and wars to destroy the remaining national projects. Please move on. Yeros and Ja identify four trajectories among the peripheral states in this late colonial phase. That's, of course, on top of the socialist revolutionary states, which constitute another more radical, more stable type of projects. So the first trajectory is of the radicalized states that remains in the Bandung spirit, retains a national project and an anti-imperialist agenda. The second one is restabilizing states after crisis. They return to the fold of the monopolies after crisis, and often this come out of the destruction, the demolition of radicalized projects. Also, the next two trajectories, they are kind of interchangeable. The third one is that fractured states, which lost their territorial bureaucratic cohesion to armed rebels and warlords, and occupied states and peoples, which succumbed to imperialist wars of aggression. So in one case, the states are fractured amongst different rebel groups, and then the second case, which is the fourth one, imperialism directly occupies with armed forces these states. Please move on. So coming now to our topic itself, which is democracy and elections at the periphery. The relationship between monopoly capital and liberal democracy is different at the center and at the periphery. From at the outset, we must say that liberal democracy is a historical novelty, even in the center. It really kicked off after World War II with the universal suffrage. And also that monopoly capital has a superficial commitment to liberal democracy, and it often resorts to fascism when it's threatened by the radical left, which is the force that really challenges it. So although liberal democracy poses itself against the two extremes, fascism on one side and the radical left on the other, it's really only the radical left that poses a threat to monopoly capital. So monopoly capital has no problem resorting to fascism. At the periphery, on the other hand, the main modes of rule, as I have said before, are the colonial modes of rule. So there are basically three types: the colonies of exploitation, colonies of settlements, and semi-colonies. So those are the modes of rules that capital has been pursuing for all of its history. So it's not liberal democracy that's the main mode of rule of capital, of monopoly capital, but are the colonial modes of rule. And the conditions for the transition to liberal democracy at the century, they matured under the colonial regime in force, and that in turn made possible the transformation of the colonial regime into the neocolonial regime, and the transition to the liberal democracy also at the periphery. Please move on. This brings us to the contradictory character of liberal democracy at the periphery, because at the one hand, liberal democracy is a historical victory for the peoples of the periphery, and it's been able to dismantle the colonial modes of rule and achieve the regime of sovereignty and universal suffrage. So it dismantled the colonial modes of rule and transitioned to the neocolonial mode of rule. At the other hand, during the neocolonial stage, especially in late neocolonialism, liberal democracy has been weaponized by imperialism to deprive the peoples of the same sovereignty and national project. So it's used by imperialism to dismantle national projects. Please move on. So liberal democracy as a neocolonial weapon. In the absence of a structured Bandung international project, which builds the historical consciousness of the peoples of the periphery, it's easy for imperialism to dismantle weak national projects and catapults incumbents, in electoral situations that stands for imperialist agenda. They come with a lot of resources and interfere with the elections. This is the first expedient used by imperialism to restabilize a peripheral states during a crisis or which is on a radicalized path. And that usually works. So we have many examples of peripheral states that are currently stabilized under a neocolonial mode of rule and do not pose a threat to imperialism, because imperialism manages to interfere with the elections and block national projects of achieving state power. Only if that strategy does not work is when imperialism resorts to the other two tactics of the number 3 and 4 of the trajectories, which is fracturing or occupying the states. So the results of these struggles amount for the trajectories that we see in the world today. You can move on. So this is just an exploratory initial analysis. I'm not familiar with all the cases here, but just to give a few examples of states that have been at the target of imperialism and entered one or other trajectory as a result of the struggles we have been talking. So there are a few states that remain in a radicalized trajectory, even though they have been, imperialism has attempted to interfere, but so far imperialism has failed due to stronger consciousness of the people, a more protective political system, popular control over armed forces that are strong, and the building of the national project into the states itself and not merely the government. So just a few examples: Algeria, Angola, Belarus, Iran, Russia, Venezuela, Zimbabwe. There are states that are currently under severe threats of being restabilized, as we are seeing in Bolivia and especially Mozambique. There are those states, most of them, that have been stabilized because attempts at building national projects have been subject to imperialist intervention. And as a result, current contradictions with imperialism are kept in a relatively low degree. Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, India, Mexico, Peru, South Africa, Ukraine. Please move on. If that strategy fails, imperialism resorts to the other two. So the fracturing of states because of the funding of regional, ethnic, and religious groups, armed groups, resulting in the destruction of states capable of pursuing a national project: Congo, Libya, Mozambique, Syria, Yemen. As you can see, Mozambique is a target of two strategies because there's a electoral interference and also the fracturing of the state due to the armed groups, rebel groups in the north. And states that have been occupied by imperialist forces directly: Haiti, the southern part of Korea, Palestine, Western Sahara, and also states that have reverted to, after occupation, to another trajectory: Afghanistan, Iraq. Please move on. I'm just finishing. So okay. $1 million question. The Leninist question: what is it to be done? As you can learn from the trajectories, the second one depicts the countries that have been subject to electoral interference aimed at dismantling incipient national projects during late neocolonialism. So there are, inside this, there are different tactics. So judicial coups, as in Brazil, Bolivia, Peru, funding of fascist electoral alternatives, Argentina, Brazil, India, destabilization through tactics known as color revolutions, Brazil, Ukraine, or simply by making sure mildly left elected governments stays within the boundaries of neocolonialism, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, South Africa. Brazil is really the laboratory because it has been subject to all of these tactics. And this highlights the importance of protecting the electoral, cultural, and military superstructures against imperialist interference. Otherwise, elections are turned against the sovereign aspirations of the people. Also, as a side note, nations with past experience of settler colonialism have an additional challenge, as settlers are prone to align themselves with imperialism at the expense of the nation, even more so when the settlers constitute the hegemonic force in the military. Please move on. And we have to learn from our comrades, because trajectory number 1 gives the example of a sovereign democracy should look like in this moribund phase of late neocolonialism. And as we can see that the peoples of the South are once again emerging and moving, aiming for a brighter future. So we have to protect the electoral and judicial systems to make them relatively immune to imperialist interference. Make sure we have a strong, conscious, and educated people that can see the clashing of forces of the conjuncture internationally. And armed forces, that's really important, that are subject of the people, and armed forces that are an integral part of the national project, and not an armed force that turns against the project. I will end over here. Thank you again for the opportunity.
As for another smooth and impressive presentation. I think we had 3 wonderful presentations so far. Now we move on to Ndongo. Ndongo will talk about the Sahel region, which has also been under imperialist aggression. So issues of sovereignty, democracy, and solidarity also do arise. So it's an important sub-region focus. Over to you, Ndongo.
Thank you, Freedom. I'm really pleased to be here among all of you. So thanks to the organizers for the invitation. As Freedom said, my talk today is about recent developments in Francophone Africa, and especially in the Sahel. As you know, since 2020, there have been 9 successful military coups across Africa. When I say successful coup, I just mean that military coups that led to a change in government. So it's not used in a moral sense. These developments, these military coups have led most of the liberal commentators, the media, to talk about the returns of coups in Africa, the retreat from democracy and democracy backsliding. And for all of these major liberal commentators, people who claim to be attached to democratic values, civil rule, and so on, these military coups are a very bad thing because they undermine democracy and they undermine what they call the normal constitutional order, a concept which is seldom, investigated. I would like to debunk this narrative by making the case that these military coups, some of them which happened in the Sahel, are a leap forward in the African liberation project. And to argue that case, I will rely on 2 articles I published last year, one by Agrarian South and the other by the Review of African Political Economy. I will make 7 points. The first point is a conceptual one. From a purely scholarly perspective, there is no country across the world that could claim to be democratic. When I say that, I'm not saying that democracy is an ideal that can be achieved, etc. I'm saying that the regimes labeled as democracies are not democracies; they are oligarchies. That's how they were perceived for more than 2 millennia. Because what most people do not grasp is that modern political language is totally fraudulent. Totally fraudulent. The political category we use are totally fraudulent, most of them. Democracy, dictatorship, all of these categories are fraudulent because they have been hijacked by liberalism. Why could I say that? Because for more than 2 millennia, since the 5th century before BC, to the 19th century, you would not find any Western thinker that defended the word democracy and the idea of political equality associated with it. Why? Because democracy originally comes from demokratia, demos and kratos. And demos meant the poor people who have civil rights. So those who are not slaves, those who are not foreigners, and those who are not, who are not women. So demos meant the poor people who have political rights. And kratos did not mean government, but violent rule, because democratia was born as an insult, used by the aristocracy I mean, all the people that wrote these philosophical books like Aristotle, Plato, and so on, and all the rich people at that time to castigate, political regimes where the laws were made and controlled by the ordinary people. That was the meaning of democracy. That's why they hated the word democracy for more than 2,000 years. And what happened in the 19th century is that, I mean, the political language has been, turned on its head from one day to another. And there's a very powerful essay by the son-in-law of Karl Marx, Paul Lafargue, who made this point, who showed how political language changed, after the French Revolution. And at that time, people were saying, to change the reality, we have to change the language. And so for 2 millennia, I mean, from the antiquity to the mid-19th century, you would not find any Western thinker that would say democracy is a good thing, because democracy for them was associated with tyranny of the people. So they hated that. So the modern constitutions were born out of, the ambition to check people's power. First, it was the power of absolute monarchy, but after it was, to check the power of the people. And elections also have never been associated with democracy for more than 2 millennia. And it is a matter of logic in the sense that elections are the procedures through which you put in place an elite, because elections and elite share the same grammatical root. So elections could, in principle, never be democratic. And for more than 2 millennia, there have been no serious thinker that used the concept of democratic elections, and it operated only with the advent of, let's say, liberalism from the mid-19th century. But no thinker would ever talk about democratic elections. So the system we have, especially in the US, is an oligarchy. And when you look at the way the US Constitution has been designed, you could see that in 1787, when they gathered their 55 members who draft the Constitution, their main project was how to make sure that this country will never become a democracy. And that's why when you go, to Google, you check the US Constitution, federal Constitution, you will never see the word democracy and democratic in it, because this Constitution was made against democracy. Yet the US would sell itself from 1945 as the best democratic country in the world that would spread democratic values, etc. This system, when you look at the 19th century dictionaries, was called elective aristocracy. And sometimes it was called government of the ablest by some liberal thinkers, not democracy at all. But saying this, that this system, political system, is oligarchic, does not mean that there have not been democratic achievements by the people. And in the West, there have been democratic achievements by the people, by working class struggles, women's struggles, etc. But within the framework of imperialism, and at the moment also, where you had the communist counter project and the revolt of the Third World. Just one anecdote. You see in 1957, Vice President Nixon made a report to his president, Dwight Eisenhower, called The Emergence of Africa. And in that report, because Nixon went to Africa to visit 12 dozen countries, and he met Nasser, he met Kwame Nkrumah, etc. And he told in that report that, in fact, the leaders in Africa do not take seriously the United States due to racial discrimination and the lack of racial equality. And he said in that report, if you do not want to lose our face in face of the Third World and the communist world, we have to methodically abolish racial segregation. And this measure would be taken, some years ago, in the following years, to say that liberal democracy in itself is not progressive. It's only through struggle and in particular circumstances that it was able to deliver some, achievements for the people. So representative government, liberal democracy is not democratic at all. It's an oligarchy that produced a democratic achievement in very particular circumstances that I think cannot be generalized, across the planet, because it was based on imperialism. It is based on imperialism. The second point is that the principle of representation was introduced by the bourgeois, in the centers of the world system, in France, in the UK, in Britain, and in the US. But in the French colonies, this principle of representation was introduced by colonial and slavery interest after the French Revolution, because the principle of representation did not exist before the French Revolution, because the monarchy did not allow representation. It was its own prerogative. So the principle of representation was introduced in the colonies because the colonial and slavery lobbies wanted to be at the National Assembly created from the Revolution to defend their colonial and slavery interests. So elections have always existed in the colonies, but they have never been progressive at all. They always serve the needs of empire, slavery, colonialism. And the metropole never allowed dissidents of empire to get elected. So these are things that we have documented in the book published, last year. And the history of electoral frauds, electoral violence, etc., was not something invented by Africans. In fact, this happened, from the French Revolution until the time of independence in Africa. And this is what we call the electoral imperialism, how elections have been used to cement the empire. So the third point is that in the case of most Francophone countries, they did not have a proper independence. We could say until now, most of them are not really independent, but they are trying to become independent. Because France gave them independence without the attributes of sovereignty. Because when France realized that it could have, colonial rules, France decided to grant them universal suffrage in 1957. 1956, that was the main motivation to say that we have this Indochina war, Algeria war, etc. We don't want war with our colonies in sub-Saharan Africa. So we give them universal suffrage so that they would participate. But in fact, elections were always rigged. And the communist parties, the nationalist parties, the Pan-Africanist parties, they would never win elections because everything was done to rig elections. And when they did not rig elections, they simply prohibited, for example, communist parties or nationalist parties. And the best example is the UPC, Union de Population, the Cameroon Union of the Population of Cameroon. They were the best, in fact, in terms of popularity, the most popular political party in Cameroon. They were prohibited in 1955. And from that year, there had been a war against, the UPC and the bastions of the UPC from 1955 to 1971. And there have been tens of thousands of people killed. Recently, there have been a commission of historians, French historian and African historian, who documented this because they tried to belittle that, to say that, oh, people were exaggerating. But now they looked at the archives and they saw there have been a consistent pattern of massacre of, the nationalist party and its bastions. So at the time of independence, except for Guinea, where Sékou Touré was the leader, a trade unionist, and Sylvanus Olympio in Togo, which was territory under the tutelage of the United Nations. All of the other leaders in the 16 countries dominated by France in sub-Saharan Africa have been put to power by France. So that's what we call French, imperial right. That means the right to choose who should govern in these countries. So that means that at the time of independence, most of the progressive forces have been ousted from power. But after the independence, there have been some elites that were formerly loyal to France that tried to dissent a bit from empire. They were all removed from power without exception. For example, in Senegal, Mamadou Dia, in Mali, Modibo Keïta, and in Niger, Amadi Dioré. So the fourth point is that from 1960 to 2020, the only
minutes. Wow.
How much?
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Two more minutes.
Okay. So the only leaders that were anti-imperialists that managed to conquer state power came from the military, without exception. From 1960 to 2020, we could think of people like Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso, Mayan Gwabi in Congo, Brazzaville, and Joseph Rassimandrava in Madagascar. They were all killed. So since 2020, for the first time, we have 4 leaders against French imperialism, 3 leaders in the Sahel and Senegal. And Senegal, in fact, our president, Bassirou Diomaye Faye, he's the first civilian leader to oppose France-Afrique, who managed to get elected last year in April. So my 5th point is that there is no return of course. because most of the successful military coups worldwide in Africa happened during the Cold War. There have been a total of 375 coups between 1960 and 2023 across the world, and 75% occurred before 2000. In Africa, Francophone countries have always been the champions of coups, 71 out of 160. And there have been two determinants of coups since 2020. First being a former French colony. Since 2020, 8 out of 9 coups happened in Francophone countries. The second determinant is being in a zone militarized by the West. Since the destruction of Libya by NATO, France, UK, and the United States, there have been 19 coups across the continent. 15 happened in North Africa and in the Sahel. That means it's imperialism that creates the context for coups. The sixth point is that there are no democratic backsliding for the obvious reason that countries where coup happened have never been democracies. Elections were rigged or were organized with no genuine competition or popular participation. You take the case of Niger in 2020. Mohamed Bazoum was elected in a country where you have 23 million people. Voting age population 9.6 million. He was elected in second round with 2.5 million people. You see, that is democracy. And these leaders were Western puppets who opposed the people's demand to remove French troops, to get rid of the colonial currency, the CFA franc, and also to have a national control over natural resources. But when you look at, for example, the opinion surveys, independent opinion survey, for example, one done by the German Foundation, Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, you could see in the case of the Mali that population have been highly supportive of the military regime. You could see that 81% of the population felt that the situation has improved. 99% was satisfied with the security forces. 80% had confidence in the transition. It was 2024, these numbers. And 87% approved of decision to postpone elections. And you have similar results for Burkina Faso in the Afrobarometer survey for 2024. So the last point in conclusion is that these coups are coups against imperialism because they were not wanted by imperialism. You have different patterns of coups. In Gabon, in Chad, it was coups to reorganize the neocolonial setting. But in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, these have been really anti-imperialist coups. And you could see that through the removal of French troops, the assertion of more control over national resources, the creation of the Alliance of Silent State, and the creation of a defense pact to fight jihadism, and also their exit from ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, which has been captured by Western and French interests, and which also imposed them cruel illegal sanctions. And also these countries plan to create a common currency to ditch the colonial CFA franc. And the influence of these three countries has been such that reactionary countries such as Cote d'Ivoire and Chad felt the need to announce the removal of French troops. In the case of Chad, they went even to cancel the Sacred Defense Agreement, which with France, and Chad had always been the military bastion of France in Africa. So what we are witnessing is not so-called democratic backsliding, but the proper decolonization of some parts of Francophone Africa. And all these recent achievements were unthinkable in the framework of so-called normal constitutional order. And the best proof of that is the following. A terrorist group has sabotaged the pipeline running from Benin to Niger. But their main claim behind this act of sabotage has been that they wanted a return to what they called normal constitutional order. That was the first time I saw a terrorist group saying that they are doing acts of sabotage because they want to return to liberal democracy. So the countries in the Sahel face many challenges, security, climate, economic, etc. But I think they are showing us the way towards African liberation. Thank you.
John, come back to you. Now we move on to Sabine. So Abim will share, Steve will share about the Abim's presentations in the form of your PowerPoint.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me today. What I would like to share is, it might be controversial application of how we are working or dealing with democracy in terms of institution rather than election, as my colleagues talking about. So from that, I would like to share how we are treating contradiction of capitalism in our countries, especially how we are building alliance with our colleagues in the North and using their democratic institution in order to voice out our objection, our grievance, our challenge for, I think, our objection or voices against modernization, development projects that actually implemented by leaders or by recent regimes. So if we are moving to first slide, because we used to be in the moment of abandon, and this abandon moment, that's why I'm back again to India, and then Nasser time, we have this solidarity, we have, as all of you are actually discussed and know, there is no such divergence between leaders and social forces on the ground. So all of us, we know who is our enemy, like Paris yesterday mentioned, this is our enemy, we need to end the colonization. And in order to do that, we need to build our nation. And to build our nation, we need modernization. Okay, this is the line all of us, we know. But the social forces has started to, as a divergence between the vision from our leaders or liberation leaders, and also in the time of Nasser and in time of, I cannot generalize, but my experience as Nasser time, especially in personal experience, about dam construction, because all dam construction and the other giant construction looks like a development, looks like an assassination building, but on the ground, what about displacement happening? What about destruction is happening? But on the other side, people and the different ethnic group trying to overlook what this pitfall, I can say pitfalls of our leaders, of our liberation leaders, because we would like to fight this enemy. Gradually, when we are talking about application of SAP, structural adjustment programs, and how neocolonization is happening later on, this regime is trying to survive. So in order to survive, the gap is starting to stretching, and violence is becoming severe, and it becoming to a deadly application over whatever the social forces contradicts, resist what leaders or what this national development is happening. So unfortunately, what is happening is this development obsession with this big projects or with the stability of regimes or the mode of production, it is applied over the transnational level and also the regional organization. If we move to the next slide, here in African Union, and may I take a short paragraph, it is about the vision of our scholars with good intention, as they trying to make a good African development, African rising, and our architect for BRICS or regional economic communities, Prof. Adeji from Nigeria, when he talking about self-reliance, he mentioned that we need the participation of mass of people in the production and consumption of social products. So actually what is happening is we use or we can see the social forces as a means. It might be like what Twinkle just sharing about media in India. So we are means in order to fulfill what is the vision of leaders, either in regional perspective or regional organizations, as well as national level. And the second slide, please. We have another idea or another tackling of this development, it's coming from Eke. And you know Eke and how he also a very prominent Nigerian scholar, but he's trying to looking at this modernization from different perspectives. We are social forces. They are not a means for just to enter in production and reproduction. So he mentioned that this is not modernization as long as people are not the end and just a means of development. So, and this has led us to have authoritarian regime, and this is unfortunately what is many African countries are facing under the slogan, we build the nation, which is sovereignty, under the slogan that we need stability, under the slogan that we would like to catch the other developed country. So if we would like to talk about which vision, it is Eke vision or Adeji vision prevailing in Africa, this is Adeji perception. And the other, they are, with due respect for, they are my professors, my colleagues in African Union and in other African organization, economic organization, but it is coming from economic first, rather than to stressing over the right of social forces to be part or to own the development process. And let me to conclude by two examples. So we moved for the next slide. Just to remember Wangari Maathai. Wangari Maathai in Kenya, when she resisted this plan of Arab Moi, and also part of her contestation with Arab Moi regime, when she contested or she resisted to convert Uhuru Park into capitalist concrete place with high scabbard to take Nairobi as this is the governmental discourse, a new modernization, and this is to make Kenya progress or development, what she did, she trying to reaching, because of all oppression and all violence happening in our countries, one of her tools, listen to talk to British investors, listen to talk to funders, in order to hold back this investment happening, because I cannot move in my institution in my country. But the reaction coming from parliamentarian, and this is paragraph from her memoir, she's saying that they accused her what they considered a sovereign issue. Why she talked or started a conversation with foreigners as it is back to colonization. To develop Uhuru Park, it is a sovereign issue of the state, and she has to apply for this. And they accusing her. This is another dynamic showing us how capitalism is working, violence is working, and sovereignty of the state. And there's a second one, which is a recent one, slide please, which is, you may know about it. It is a COP project, which is currently is undergoing. This is the Africa oil, crude oil pipeline, which is extended from Albert Lake in Uganda, and it is in order to export it from Tanzania, regardless destructing all natural reserve in this area, and regardless of what is happening, this tourism, it is part of national economy in terms of capitalists, and it is this extractive one. But they insisting, this regime is insisting to do this project. Why? Because Uganda would like to be one of oil exporters, which is, this is our dream, this is the national development. Same for Tanzania, I would like to use my advantage as a port for other landlocked countries and to be part of trade, international trade. So what they are doing, they are not raising any activism happening against this ECOP or this pipeline. What is the tool? The tool we can see or we can follow is actually this pipeline is constructed by Total. This is a French oil company who use in order to, again, to hold back this force, we need a French NGO. So there are many, but as far as I know, there are different cases in front of the court from the Friends of the Earth organization against Total. Again, Ugandan people, Tanzanian people, they try to reject this development according to the regimes, but the reaction is violence. So what should be our tool? Our tool is to build alliance with the Western institution and give them the virtue. It is democracy or not democracy? This is what Sal is. But by the end of the day, we need to use the principle of check and balance. So I can go to the West using their institutional check and balance in order to defend my right on my land, to defend my right as poor, defend my salary, whatever the production dynamics. And this is like what I'm thinking about it. Yes, and in terms of reality, we need transnational solidarity with our colleagues or comrades in the North in order to use their institution. But on the other time, this is very fragile, what like Dr. Tutsi just mentioned. It is fragile, especially what we are facing up now with Trump. So if our alliance in the North cannot do that, so we are in between. We cannot find any help from the North and on the ground from our authoritarian. This is my.
Thank you, Abi. Now we'll move on to our last presentation for this roundtable.
I'm giving the mic or am I audible?
Okay, use the mic.
Only it's too far. Okay, good afternoon and thank you. And I'll compliment what Twinkle had said earlier. And yesterday, Mr. Jha and Mr. Manish also made some intervention with reference to working classes. But I'll begin with the question and examine some dimensions of the question which Lucas asked. So has liberal democracy kind of stabilized in the Indian context? I'm speaking specifically to India vis-a-vis imperialism. So he seemed to think it has. Eternally on. So we'll examine some of those. I'll examine some of those aspects from my perspective. And I want to begin with the objective condition of the working classes of India. I'll get to some of the data points to examine that in a trajectory of about 10 years. So it's a fairly secular trajectory. First of all, also period is not a small period. And I want to say that as we stand today, about 800 million people of India are dependent on food handouts or what is called free food. In our case, it's called some kind of given. About 110 million farming. We have a huge ongoing agrarian crisis, decades old. And in that context, about 110 million farmers are dependent on $7 per month given by the Prime Minister of India in his name. Prime Minister's Krishi Saman or Krishi. They have all PM schemes here. We are in a situation now where we have a plethora of private company-led, corporate-led insurance programs, from corporate insurance to capital insurance, you name them, to health insurance, to all kinds of insurances where the contributions as of now are being subsidized by the state. And emerging data on the benefits of that insurance is really tardy. So you have a whole range of state funds going into that insurance. Most recently, even life insurance has been sort of open to FDI. So most of the money is going to those insurers and so forth, with very limited outcomes. There are fewer programs. These go on. Most recently, the gig workers of India have also been brought under. Gig workers about 1 million right now, and they have also been brought under some health insurance program in a similar trajectory. Give it to the companies and do it. Now, while this is so, while this has been going on, some sort of cash handouts, the erstwhile public employment programs, we call it the Mahatma Gandhi National Employment Program, for instance, which guaranteed around 100 days of employment for rural India. Demands were to expand it. Days demands were to expand it in urban areas. Continue to be starved at precarious levels. So expansion is a pipe dream, so they continue to be starved. And there's a choking of financial allocations. This goes as well to public health. This goes as well to public education. This goes as well to almost negative allocations, if you put inflation into it, for social sector allocations, except for a few sort of kind of scheme announcements. And in general, we see public schemes, public employment, the idea of creation of dignified work, the idea of creation of some sort of dignified, if not minimum wages, being replaced gradually over this 10-year period by some sort of cash supported handouts. Something I want. Now, on the other hand, I spoke to it yesterday, so I don't know the point, but we obviously labor-intensive industrialization in public hands of rural industrialization is a far cry. So what we now see is that there is a contraction of the manufacturing sector. We have noted the decline yesterday, so I will not repeat, and outflow of wage workers from industries, from the manufacturing sector. Okay, so there is an outflow of workers from regular employment, wage employment, into what is called self-employment categories. What forms of self-employment? There has been over this period a 6% increase in self-employment, and therefore a contraction in regular employment. Now, large parts of self-employment are in the rural agrarian sector, agriculture sector. About 2% increase. I mean, people are finding refuge, if I may say, in agriculture. Over these years, Manish mentioned yesterday, there's a 2% increase in population involved in agriculture. And this is led by women. In case of women, the increase has been up to 6%, largely led by call it. And of course, parts of self-employed category are also gig workers and other forms of newer employment, informal employment that have come. In this period, the real wages, now I'm talking of 8 years, the real wages have declined for women by 32%. So women in self-employed category, their wages, real wages have declined by 32%. They were already at precarious levels at 4,348 rupees, and they've gone down 1,950 rupees in this period. For men also, they have declined, but less sharper. In the case of self-employed, the decline is about 9% in terms of real wages for men. Even in salaried employment, regular employment or regular wage category itself, salaried employment, the decline is by 10%. By 12% for women and about 6% for men. The only place it's kind of held out is in daily wage work, non-public employment.
I have to do some. It's better now. Yes. She's saying, I can hardly hear something. Better now. So it's okay.
Yeah, can I
increase
okay, so I'll be a bit louder. So in some cases, so the only real somewhat increase, marginal but at precarious levels, is a case of daily wage work in non-public sector employment. Gender disparities have, in terms of wage, gender gaps, pay gaps, have increased sharply, as I explained just now. Increased sharply, I mean, the idea of equal wage has receded probably by a decade and a half in that category. Women's work participation rate, female work participation rates have shot up substantially over a 10-year period, from 23.1% to about 42%, 41% something. So there's a sharp increase. A large part of that increase is on account of what I call distress-based female work participation. So it's survival-based work participation on account of trajectories that there are. I mean, when you say female work participation rate, I think I should use the word distressed females work participation rates. A part of it is also the enhancement of work participation rates in case of women has also been on account of unpaid work being counted. So women's drudgery is, I mean, some would welcome it from other standpoints, from struggle standpoints, but women's drudgery is being counted as well. Now, this being so, in the meanwhile, the corporate sector profits have really, I mean, I think a lot of it was explained, but corporate sector profits have really shot up. They're at a 15-year high. Profits to GDP ratios is more than double, and wages have lagged, as we all know. Now, profits in the last year alone surged up by 20% for the 500 listed companies and many other corporations, the large ones. While the wage rates had only increased by, I'm talking of nominal wage rates now, only by 1.5%. So you see a 23% and you see a 1.5%. In any case, cost cutting on workforce expansion is what is happening, and you have people being pushed into precarities. There's subhuman conditions, call it whatever, totally subhuman conditions. One of the largest employers in the organized sector is micro, small and medium enterprises, like what we call MSMEs, which are more labor intensive. All of the MSMEs are struggling. There's a whole range of data indicators, struggling for credit, struggling for even survival. So this is the situation, and even CapEx investments, which have been touted in the last few years, capital investments or capital expenditure investments by the government of India, which have been touted as creating a positive sentiment, eventually creating employment, creating a ripple effect in the economy, have been underutilized, have been handed out to corporations, have been totally. There's a drastic situation there. Separate analysis have. And this was back to an outstanding project, which has been outstanding for decades for realization, which is the question of land redistribution. Was again referred to, so rising landlessness, people having to resort to for tenant farming or what you call land leasing. So that tells you the precarity of the situation. So this is one trajectory of, and it goes to answer your question, Frida. So how have liberal democracies over a long period, answered the aspirations of the majorities of the country? So this data will tell you how we are progressing or regressing in that direction. Now there's another aspect that I want to talk to, which is the question of the all-encompassing cultural project of India. Now, it's interesting because this project and probably needs a far detailed investigation and a unique investigation. This project is located in a long, continued civilizational history. So, how unique is this cultural project when you are in a long, continued civilization? And we need further analysis on how a social being is constructed in these continued civilizations, where present merges into the long past of social memory. And you have ample number of opportunities to parachute into one part of history or another part of history for a political project or for an electoral project. Let me put it as talking of electoral politics. And therefore, the construct of decolonization itself. In one way. Now, this cultural project is something that the current ruling party, of course, there was a cultural project before. The cultural project before is a constitutional cultural project, a secular cultural project, a cultural project which in the social memory of India, years long history, doesn't have a memory beyond 70, 80 years. But this one resides itself into the long social memory, 10,000 years. So there is this important thing, and the implications it has on models of the thinking of the imagery of social order, of governance, of the god kings, of power itself. Then, of course, there's the whole question of religion, which has been mentioned since yesterday, somewhat in the passing, somewhat active way. But in a situation where you have a diverse country with huge degrees of diversity, but one majoritarian access possible for subjugated to used for exploitation is the Hindu population, which is about 84%, and the construction of the idea of political religion or the Hindutva. So that's the other aspect that has become important. And of course, a significant religious minority, which can be easily subjected to a fascist othering. So in some ways, that is what we say. We also see, and this is another aspect that goes to electoral politics, somewhat unique, is the social and geographical segregation that India has in terms of social diversities, the castes, the ethnicities, the religion itself. So in the geographical sense, I mean, the Dalits are in separate geographical hamlets, including in urban areas. So it hasn't lost the character in cities of India. Muslims are in ghettos, separate sort of geographical settings. Indigenous peoples are located into particular territories. So this requires considerable importance when you're talking of democratic processes, and much more importantly, the electoral processes in terms of how voting behaviors would be, what kind of messages need to be delivered wherever. So I just wanted to sort of flag it off. Now, in terms of elections, delivering control, you actually don't need numbers. We have a first past the post system, about 60%, 65%, 60% on average when you turn up to vote. So you probably need about 30, 32%, 35%, 50%, or slightly more, depending on the shares turnouts. But what is needed is a deep-rooted and expansive social organization, a cadre, so to say. And this is new analysis here, but how efficient, how activated, or how grassrooted is your cadre? A political machine to manage, control voting, to control outcomes of voting, to control the election machine itself, the administrative election machine, and to ensure that you check on non-supporters, you disable non-supporters from voting. And you ensure it, you do it through, one of the points I spoke to was geographical segregation or social segregation, but the other ways, delay tactics, the sort of electronic voting machine intervention possibilities that you have, which in a sense of divided societies is far more easier. And then so this is something that I want to sort of also touch on. The use of election administration, control of redress processes, and the control of the instrument itself. I am at very operational levels this presentation. So as far as democratic, what I say, political outcomes are concerned, it is needed is to get first past the post. Now, what is useful is to have a cultural project in this kind of a context, the creation of a hegemonic bloc, so to say, based on, use various things, whether it's caste, whether it's ethnicity, and an appeal to a majoritarian sentiment, the convenience of that appeal. A ground organization with the ability, in addition, to ward off possibilities of a social alliance of majorities. So how do you ensure that the coming together of majorities of workers and peasants, in any case, that is semi-prolet, this sort of mixed category, castes, different geographical alliances, regional alliances, how do you ensure they stay fragmented and are not able to come together in a political instrument? So this is what you need. And what you need is, of course, the control of instruments of mass media, which has been spoken to in detail by Twinkle, and very well spoken to by Twinkle. Now, the challenge, however, is this seems like, and this is where debate with the us could be. The challenge, however, is this doesn't seem to be working. There's a growing contestation of the working classes. So the debate on the discussion on false consciousness, has this cultural project succeeded in creating false consciousness among the working classes of India? I tend to think probably not, and has not. And the momentum, the contestation of working classes articulated through popular ongoing struggles and movements, compensatory for workers, is growing and facing increased violence from them. The weaponization of state, the surveillance of state is growing, has grown considerably. Some indicators were topped off by Twinkle, but all kind of freedom indicators are under duress. But on the other hand, if you look at it, the struggles have not weaponized themselves. And this is something I probably needs some more reflection, because one would see a counter weaponization in terms of, I mean, there is a history of counter weaponization, limited in particular geographies of India back in the 70s, but one doesn't see that trajectory. I mean, we can discuss this. Now, what are the calculations of likelihood of victory? Yesterday, Max was talking about that factor. How do the working classes see the likelihood of victory? Is the moment of victory inflated? In democratic politics through the party political instruments is an open question. And I think this is the kind of my response to if we were to study liberal democracies. Of course, we all know, and Swazi started off by saying how it's not delivering and can't deliver, and so on and so forth. My question would be to see, would be to sort of more in positive, to sort of look at, it seems almost inevitable. It seems almost that liberal democracy is stabilized vis-a-vis imperialism, but that's not how we see the struggles and the movements and what is really the turmoil in terms of the precarity that the national government has, and their precarious or their sort of, what is the word in English for it? That they are afraid, they're fearful in their response is probably, and the actions that they take is probably a response to this huge base of insecurity of continuation. So, to my opinion, is never an eternal stability, and it hasn't. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Sandeep, all the presenters, the rich contributions on this topic on democracy, elections, and the working people in late colonialism. I think from all the presentations, before we can open the floor, I think what we generally note is that liberal democracy has failed to address the national question. Hence, we see issues such as fragmentation, deindustrialization, tensions, which are based on religion or ethnicity. From the presentations, I think we have also picked that, especially from Sandeep, that there has been a creation of labor reserves. So, in some way, I think we know that liberal democracy has not, and I think Dogo's presentations comes well to explain how the national question has not been resolved, that these coups which are coming in now, they are anti-imperialist in nature. So we faced with some sort of contradictions at this moment in time. So we'll open up the floor for questions and contributions from all the presentations that have been made. 6 presentations, and I think, yeah. So,
One clarificatory question for Lucas. So towards the end of your presentation, it seems that you have suggested that judicial and election systems are immune to the imperial interferences. So can you please elaborate on that aspect? There is a second question, which is basically for all presenters, especially for Professor Sikata. So there are problems with the liberal democracy that we are witnessing currently. And from the textbook of communism, we understand that people's democracy would be an alternative to this. But the question is how to reach that stage, stage of the people's democracy.
It's a question for all, but specifically connected to Lucas and Professor Chikata. But all small questions. Yes, Congress.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you all for the very interesting presentations. Really a very important debate. I'm very glad we're having it. And I hope we take it forward. I'm sure we will. Now, my question is to everyone, but specifically, I think to Dongo on the Sahel. One of the issues in any case, whether it's a military coup, which is anti-imperialist, or whether it's an election force, civil society comes together and manages to advance. In every case, a political party makes a difference. Yeah, nothing seems to work without or have longevity without a political party. And especially in the cases that we've seen where change comes through a military insurrection. We've seen this in Latin America as well. The first thing that is done, or needs to be done soon, is the formation of a political party. So my question, and that we saw that in Venezuela. I mean, there's a number of cases. So my question is, what is the next stage in this development? Where do you see this going in the countries in that Mali, Burkina Faso? Are they managing to consolidate a political party which can organize for taking the project forward?
Thank you. Any other question? We invite questions, but if there are no questions, we'll go back to the presenters that they can respond. If there are no...
There are lots of questions on the chat, so I don't know whether you can read.
Okay, maybe
One says the chat.
But now, probably we can start. Maybe if you want to read the questions.
Rafael has created.
Rafael is present. Yeah. Or Rafael is the chat box.
Can I? Are you hearing me?
Yes, I see it.
No, I was thinking here, just maybe a contribution in the communication and the media interference in our debate. I research on agrarian question, but I am also from the media studies. I am journalist by formation, and I follow a bit of this debate, try to contribute a bit with Twink and maybe with Lucas too. The needing of a heavier view on the political economy of communication when we think about this, how these capital conglomerates of media, they have the oligopoly structure, and they are part of the capital clusters all over the places where they act. They're not, we can't consider them as something apart from the elites and the formation of that power in these countries, but intrinsic part of the capital process. And so by this class pointing, they act to keep the power and compose the power. And if we look at the Gramsci proposal of state, of amplified concept of state with this civil society are part of the composition of power. And maybe we can raise the question about how we have to be aware on the new stage, even the new stages of this layer of domination in the power. And if you look at the elections, we have to be very aware. We were just yesterday victims of how dangerous can be this kind of interference. And yes, the fascists are using this, we have to expand the aware about not only traditional press of TV and radio, but all the big tech influences and the big influences on the elections by the big companies which does the data mining that affect us all. And it has to be also a concern that we, the scholars, but also the left, we may aware more and prevent on the interferences in our democracies. That's it.
Sapphire, more of a comment, but maybe Twingo might want to come back again. Do you have any other questions, Steve, which is directed in the chat box? There's no question. So if there's no question, then we'll hear responses from our presenters, starting with our first presenter, Professor Chikata.
So,
I think there was a question.
Thank you very much for those difficult questions. I had a question which was asking about how to achieve a people's democracy. I will be lazy and say that without the defeat of imperialism, I can't see how a people's democracy is possible. But I believe strongly that we can deepen the democratic politics if the organizations of working people become stronger, more coherent, work together, and are not so easily co-opted by the bourgeois parties within liberal democracy. Because it's very clear that the ease with which democratic forces are co-opted is part of the big challenge. And this is also linked with the fact that the ruling elites have strong alliances with imperialism and are being shored up by the geopolitics and the political order. And if I may also make a comment on two presentations that I had earlier on. So the colleague who spoke, who characterized regimes across the world in very broad terms and talked about radicalized regimes and so on, it struck me as I listened to you that it's possible to classify states in this way only when you look at geopolitics rather than their internal configurations. And I would suggest that if one looked more closely at the internal configurations of states, as well as the geopolitical order in which they find themselves, we may not be thinking of the Congo, for example, as a state which is trying to do something revolutionary. I found that striking, and I would argue that if you looked closely at the internal politics, class politics, gender politics, and so on, of several of these revolutionary regimes, we may express some discomforts about how the struggle over meaning and for liberation can actually damage the revolutionary potential of these regimes and turn them into quite repressive institutions that oppress their own people. And one has to worry about that. And that is also linked with a related comment I wanted to make about the Sahelian regimes. I think Paris asked the question about their future. And I wanted to say that Ndongo is right when he says there's a lot of sympathy in West Africa for the Sahelian military regimes, and the idea that this is a blow against imperialism. At the same time, if these kinds of regimes have existed before. There was Sankara before, there was Rawlings and his puny efforts to address the question of imperialism and so on. But those kinds of experiences also mean that there's a skeptical constituency in West Africa about the Sahelian regimes, because we do not know how the military on its own can actually spearhead and achieve a revolution which frees the Sahel from imperialism. So I wanted to hear Ndongo's views about this. Thank you.
Thanks for that. We move Twinkle. Any response to some of the issues that we...
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Steve. I agree with Professor Dodzi. Thank you for very difficult questions. Quickly responding, in Indian case, this could be a response to Manish and the general questions that have come. In Indian case, what is happening is some platforms have come, which are run with public funding and public interest, number one. Number two is building platforms where we are safeguarding our spaces of free speech. Number three, that, a lot of mainstream journalists are resigning from the companies, and they are also opting the alternative possible platforms, largely the social media platforms, to reach out to many. And at the same time, they are also adopting interesting methods to navigate surveillance and censorship. And this is also visible in the war documentation on social media from the Palestinian journalist, right? In response to Rafael, what is happening in the Indian context is the fact that I was talking about the rise in mob lynching, the cases of mob lynchings in India, and also the example from the pandemic period where, for example, one of the cases which got a lot of highlight is the case of Tablighi Jamaat, which was a minority religious congregation. And the scale and the size of negative reporting that it received with amplification of propaganda and hate speech is something noteworthy. So in my presentation, what I was trying to do, or as social scientists, as sociologists, as media scholars, I think our job is immediately to develop a critique of media functioning, which is supporting the dominant paradigm and is actually failing to perform the institutional role of at least the fourth pillar in a democracy setup, right? And I think there was a question by you as well in the comment section, which is talking about, in terms of content, what was happening earlier. So to briefly talk about, I am not saying that, previous to this government, there is a glossy picture that we have. But definitely there is a major shift in the current regime where, to give an example, for instance, in 15 years of the rule of this government, there has not been any single press conference. And in fact, the kind of media interaction that the current Prime Minister is doing is happening through very informal channels with content which is much more personal rather than public, right? So these are my quick comments to some of the questions that emerged. Thank you.
Lucas, there were some questions which were directed to you.
Thank you, Freedom. We were discussing here in the chat about the states which are on the radicalized, what Paris and Praveen called the radicalized trajectory. I think they thought about this category as to represent, as to categorize those states that are in a national anti-imperialist path, but also to distinguish them from the revolutionary socialist projects. So I wouldn't say, trying to answer Manish, that these radicalized states are immune to electoral interference. As we could see in the Venezuelan case and the Zimbabwean case, imperialism still tries to interfere and to catapult a candidate of its own. This is very different from what happens in revolutionary socialist states, in which their democracies are really immune to this kind of interference. The political electoral system is armored against these interventions. So they are different. So the radicalized states are, so far, these ones that I have cited, they have so far managed to maintain their projects and to win against this kind of interference, but it's different from the socialist ones. Apart from that, I see that Jody is commenting here on the chat. She cited Congo and Zimbabwe. Independence of the actual content of the Congo policies, for example, what is objectively happening is the armed intervention, imperialist intervention, armed intervention through the fracture of the state in the Congo case. So Congo is objectively fighting against an imperialist intervention that independent from the actual content of the policies. So I believe that our solidarity must be directed to defend the global South in the first place, because the struggle against imperialism is an objective fact, and then we can discuss the actual policies. And that's also regarding Raphael's comments. What I've tried to I call the cultural, the strengthening of the cultural system to talk about all of these dimensions, the media, the public education, to put them all in the same category. But the media is a very important part, because and that brings us back to the radicalized path, because what you can see, for example, in Venezuela is that the state media has managed to put up an alternative narrative against the monopoly capital media that has helped in defending the Bolivarian project against the interference we have been talking about. That's a difference, for instance, when you compare to Brazil, that no such thing has been put in place, no such policy. But also, as we've been saying, a difference if you compare to the socialist cases, in which in China, for example, you talked, Rafael, about the new technologies. China is armored against that, So not only the television media and stuff, but also the social media and technology does not enter So China has a different set of social media that is able to, in that case, really make it immune to the interventions. So these are different degrees of a national defense against imperialist intervention.
There are quite a lot of issues here. I think this actually is necessary to provoke debate and discussions. I think we'll take them forward. Now we move on to John. There's also a lot here to respond.
Okay. There have been one question about what are the next steps for the countries of the Sahel. I think their main agenda will be to resistance, because they made very important gains. I mean, removing the Western troops, having, conquered some parts of their territories that were under the control of the French and the jihadists. These have been very important achievements, and they will try to resist because they face a number of threats. Threats coming from their comprador elites who are, demanding the so-called return to constitutional order, the threat from imperialist forces, the threat from jihadist forces, and also the threat from bad neighbors. For example, countries like Benin, Cote d'Ivoire have been trying to sabotage what these three countries have been doing because they are under the control of France. So I think these countries will just try to resist, to try to consolidate the state control over the territories, because they have very large territories in the case of Mali and Niger. And it's really difficult, to protect their populations from, jihadist attacks that could come at any time, you see, especially if you have neighbors that are not, too collaborative. I think that what they will try to do. And I think also France and the West, they will do their best to try to organize, I would say, a counter-revolutionary coup, or at least a reactionary coup, in the sense that if you have one coup in the either of these three countries, maybe this could disrupt the whole process. And I think they will work to that. The former French Army Chief of Staff, someone called General Quint, said, with the French, we have to come back because our future lies, with Africa and the Mediterranean. So we could not let the Sahel countries, exchanging with China, Russia, etc., without us being involved, especially given that there are a lot of economic interests from the French, for example, in terms of having access to some critical resources like uranium and so on. So I think they will just try to resist. And I think maybe if they manage to get rid of the CFA franc, they will be joining the BRICS. I think this is a step they will take. But I think one of the conditions will be to get rid of the CFA franc, at least because the CFA franc is under the formal and legal control of the French treasury. So Josie, I agree with your assessment about the Sahel. It's kind of a contradictory process, but what is different with this course is that for the first time, you have a united front of anti-imperialist leaders, and they have been rather popular, as you said. And in the story of Francophone Africa, we never saw that Sankara was an isolated figure in West Africa at that time, between 1980 and 1987. So for the first time, we have something interesting. But even if they are pressured to organize elections, that will be very difficult because they have a lot of refugees and some part of the territories are not under the state control. So it will be elections, but they will win elections eventually if they are organized, just for the sake of saying we are going to organize elections. In Chad, they did the same. In Chad, the current leader has succeeded his father, who was there for at least, 30 years. And he made a coup and he organized elections. Now he's clean. In Gabon, they will do the same. So organizing elections in themselves are something easy. And all of the leaders, when they organize elections, they make sure that they will then. I think the challenge is to reinvent, I think, democratic politics away from, these standard routines of elections and and so on. But that's something I would like to say as a last point is that, you know, you have this discourse that you need democracy for everything. I mean, liberal democracy or oligarchy or liberal oligarchy, etc. But the thing, if you look at Africa, there is a paradox. The best democracies in Africa, as in Southern Africa, like, for example, South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, these kind of countries, they are the best when you look at the democracy indexes published by, you know, the Economist, but also Mo Ibrahim Foundation, etc. But the paradox is that these so-called best African democracies are the most inequalitarian when you look at the inequality in terms of income and inequality in terms of wealth. And that is shocking in some sense, because you have some countries like Equatorial Guinea and Angola, they are described by, you know, mainstream political science as kleptocracies. Yet these so-called kleptocracies are less unequal than the best democracies in Africa. And what is the reason of these inequalities? Land inequality, basically. But the thing is, when you look at the history of land inequality and land reform for more than 1 century, you will see that most of the major significant episodes of land reform did not happen under so-called, let's say, liberal democratic regimes, because in these regimes, you could use checks and balances to maintain, you know, the status quo. So that means that sometimes people through these histories, they need to go through some phases where they achieve, you know, very important gains upon which they could build, you know, more substantive democracy, more substantive equality. Thank you.
No, thanks. Abi, anything? Sandeep? Thanks to everyone, our participants, our presenters, everyone who participated in the discussion. I think, as you heard yourself, there were quite a number of issues which were raised, discussions which will be taken forward in various forms. I will now ask about coffee break. Oh, coffee break. Then we come back and
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Freedom.
Thank you.
She's down with like
Thank you and bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Now.
SSch, huh?
It's not there. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
Freedom, do we continue on the same link for the next session?
Link for the next session. And you link will be sent. That's fine. I just check in the group.
Okay.
We don't know how the session is. The session is padding or what click. Freedom. Where's that? Thank you for tuning. Yes, it's wow. Huh? Decline of empire. Mr. Wolf is Martin Wolf. No, Richard. Richard. Okay. Yes, the security voice. Yeah.